Nothing I say is true, and I want to explain why that is. Now, all things start with one, the undifferentiated ecology, the undifferentiated whole, the world, the universe, before it is cut into pieces. Now, as we move into language, the science of cutting energy into distinct patterns, how should we divide the world? Let's look at this little narrow area of the circle. So, do you want to divide the world by darker colors and light colors? Do you want to divide the world by yellow and red colors? Do you want to divide the world by shape? And linear shape versus circular shape, maybe angles versus curves. But what about distances? What if you divided the world by distances? Now, those words all mean something to you and to me because we have agreed by a convention, a cult convention, because the root word of every culture is cult, a cult convention, that red means that more than that. There's no reason for that. We could call it bed, head, said, dead. We've just all agreed in our cult to call it red. And we've also created another set of symbols over those symbols, because first we began speaking, we began making sounds, and we began attributing some sounds to this thing and some sounds to that thing. But then we wanted a symbol of the symbol. So we invented letters to represent the sound. So the sound represents a pattern, and then the letters represent the sound. And then we print and view on various screens shapes of letters that represent the letters. And then we create sounds, right? Because R isn't red. You know, we've done all kinds of things to map out patterns and create patterns of patterns of patterns, none of which are real. But then the other thing that we do is, having done all of that, is we focus on one area at a time, like we've been focusing on red. But what about the greens, right? Well, we weren't paying attention to those, right? So we then further divide the one into tiny, tiny bits by focus. And for those of us who have had the experience of recurring, repetitious thoughts, I've got to be on time, I've got to be on time, I've got to be on time, they're very narrow, right? There's all these things going on in the world, there's all these different patterns of energy, but we're focusing on one thing, on one dimension at one moment. And then we're focusing on the symbol of that, the words and the sounds that represent the words. And that's our reality. But it's not the reality. It's our reality. It is a composition. It is as if we took the one and divided it somewhat cult-like, somewhat arbitrarily into what we call, in our cult, quadrants. This is a quadrant, that's a quadrant, that's a quadrant. Why? Because we said so. And we could do it this way, but we could just as easily do it this way. Or what about that way, right? What I'm getting at is, although it locks in pretty tightly in a cult where everyone has agreed what a quadrant is, the first person in a cult could call it a sodrant, a wadrant, and they can draw it any way they want to, right? Any way they want to. They can divide things like that. And if we grew up dividing things like that, it would make perfect sense. Of course that's a sodrant, right? That's a sodrant, that's a sodrant, of course, we all know. We all drank the Kool-Aid. We all participate in the cult. The question is it true, right? Is it true that that's a sodrant just because everyone agreed to call it a sodrant? Just because everyone agreed that that's the only sensible way to break up the one, is it true? Now, what if sodrant gets translated into Spanish as padrant? Is it still true, right? Well, it is in the Spanish cult. Everyone agrees. That's the translation. And when everyone agrees, you have the cult. You have the norm. But it's not the only one. There have been 10,000 cults, according to anthropologists, 95% of which are now dead, meaning there was a cult that called this ebullient and that ebullient. There was a cult that did that. In the infinity of time, we're only 24 billion years, we're only one planet, with a probability of supporting life like ours amongst more than 1 trillion, based on the statistics, right? We've now found more than 1 billion planets that could produce life, but those are just the ones we have found. If you take that area of the universe and extrapolate it out to the areas we have not found, there may be more than 100 trillion planets, all existing for a similar amount of time, capable of producing life, similar to our form of life, which is, of course, as cult members in an egocentric cult, the only thing that we know, right? But that exists, and everyone knew it. Everyone will know it again, right? Time is so big that every probability has the space, the ability to express itself in one form or another, at one time or another, in the vastness of the universe. And we haven't even gotten to the multiverse, right? How big is the multiverse? And how many dimensions are invisible? Well, we already know that light, which is a dimension of energy. Why? Because we said so. Right? We called that light rather than blight. And we distinguished it from sound. Why? Right? If you bring the vibration of light down into the range of hearing, it disappears from the eyes and shows up in the ears. So why is it not sound at a higher frequency? Why did we have to divide it into light and sound? Well, it's very simple. We divide it based on our measuring devices, our technology. We look out, and the things that make an appearance in this measuring device. This is a scientific instrument, and it's measuring energy. And the things that the eye can measure, we call light. And the things that the ear can measure, we call sound. But it's the same thing, just at different frequencies of energy, right? So we call low light sound and high light light, right? And very low, and very low things touch, right? And taste. Why? Because they show up in things we've called mouths and hands. And so what I'm getting at is words can cut the world into any pattern we want them to. That's one set of cuts. There's another set of cuts. There's another set of cuts. Do you realize that without words, these cuts don't exist, right? They exist because we have words running our thought patterns in the background. All thoughts are composed with words. If you take away the words, you take away the thought. You cannot think this is a branch without words. And so you cannot notice branch without the word branch. Just as you cannot notice other things going on in this image without the idea of an image, but you cannot notice other things going on here that do not have words. They're there. Reality is more impossibly complex than we can imagine. It's more dimensional than we perceive. We perceive in accordance with the observing and measuring devices of our body. That's what we perceive. Energy that shows up in the frequency that the eye can register, we say, oh, that's such and such, using words to correlate patterns of energy with language. But what about the energy that the ear cannot hear, that the eye cannot see, that the mouth cannot taste? Does it not exist? Right? Is it not just as valid outside of the cult convention that we've made up that says that nothing we can't see is real, right? That's a nice little convention. Nothing we cannot see is real. If we can't see it, it's not real. Well, it's certainly not real to us. I mean, that's obvious. If we cannot observe and measure it, whatever it is, then it's not real to us. Now, the leaf is more than the word. I can say leaf, and you can know those are those things there. But the leaf is more than the word. That is a complex pattern of subatomic particles of energy in motion that is more complex than the human mind can grasp in real time. Meaning there is more going on in the subatomic particles of one leaf than a human mind can calculate in an entire lifetime. So we use abstractions, we use words to approximate a complex reality that's bigger than we can relate to with language. So I can say there are more subatomic particles than we can measure in a lifetime. I can say that. But all of reality that is referenced by those words is far bigger than what we perceive through the lens of those words. Right? There are more things there than we can possibly measure. The word subatomic particles, that's a small symbol, subatomic particles. Doesn't take up a lot of space, a lot of time. But if we went down into the trillions of subatomic particles referenced by that tiny little symbol of reality, and actually began trying to keep up with the behavior of a single atom, we would be overwhelmed because the atom is doing its thing faster than we can say words, which means an atom is unconscious to the human brain because the human brain is founded, well, I should say human consciousness is founded with language. And so we cannot journey into the domain of the subatomic particle, because before I can say part of particle, there have been more than 1 trillion movements that are faster than the word part of a particle, right? There's so much going on. And it's not one particle. It's trillions of particles moving at trillions of times a second. They're moving faster than we can possibly think, right? And that's why words aren't real, right? They're symbols of a reality that they cannot begin to grasp, that they cannot begin to approach. They let us get a tiny, tiny symbolic inkling of reality. Now, we have, for example, around 60,000 words. Not that most of us use most of them, but within a dictionary, let's say there's 60,000 words. And what that means is we've taken the one and we've sliced it into 60,000 parts. We slice it that way, we slice it that way, and each one of these little parts is a word. Now, why not slice the one into 200,000 parts, right? 60, 120, 180, 240. Why not do 240? Let's just take each of these little words and cut it into 4 more parts. Now we've got 240,000 words rather than 60,000 words. But have we gotten any closer to reality? Or have we got a more complex map, a complex symbol of reality by creating twice as many words? This whole thing back here, just so you know, what's that? Is that reality? No. That's a big screen. And it's showing an image of reality. But is the image real? No. Here's a little setup, right? That's what I'm drawing on. But is this tablet real? Right? We're talking about trees and all this. Is this tablet a tree? Does that forest live inside this tablet? No. The tablet isn't real either. So what happened? Well, someone had another thing, a camera. Is the camera a forest? No. Well, some person took one object that captures symbols of reality, and they uploaded it to an internet which stores symbols of reality that aren't real. They're symbols of reality. It then sent the symbols out, and I sent symbols of reality. Forest backgrounds, I typed in. Is a background real? Is it really in the back? Is it ground? Is it real? Right? This is a composition, a symbol. None of these sounds are real. None of these words are real. This is not a forest. This isn't a forest. The word forest isn't a forest. The camera that took a photo, the photo isn't the forest, and the camera isn't the forest, and the person taking the photo isn't a forest. The internet isn't a forest. This screen, where's the forest, right? And what is a forest? If you cannot describe the subatomic particles within a single leaf because they're moving faster by millions and millions of percent, then you can get the word out for one single part of a particle, that all of the particles have moved so much faster than you could say the word part of a particle. Where's the forest? And by the time you've figured out where the forest is, it's moved trillions upon trillions upon trillions of times. Every single one of the subatomic particles in all of the billions of leaves, in all of the trillions and trillions of atoms, they've all moved. By the time you can say forest, trillions upon trillions of transactions of energy have taken place, and it is no longer the forest that it was. All that energy, it's now a new forest, which by the time you say the word forest, it's now something else. So we have a problem, don't we? Because words can't keep up with reality on every dimension. So first of all, you can kind of think of words as the screen resolution. So this isn't a forest, this is a screen. And this is called a 4K screen, which means 4,000 pixels per unit of space that they're measuring, 4,000 pixels, right? So this is 4,000 dots of light, according to the manufacturer, right? It doesn't mean it actually is. It just means there's a lot of people that want 4K screens, and so they have to come up with some way of justifying why you should buy another screen, because the last one was only 2K, right? But we started with phones and stuff that were down to 240 pixels, not 4,000, 240, right? And the resolution of those images was not very good. You could see when you were watching a 240 pixels, I believe it's per square inch, 240 pixels per square inch, you could see that wasn't, it wasn't the totally image the way your eye saw it. Your eye saw a higher resolution looking directly at reality than a 240 pixel screen could show. And so you could see the jagged lines, right? And you can see the jagged lines in language if you look carefully, right? You call this a hand and you call this an arm. You know, it doesn't quite cover all the terrain. Plus, it's an illusion, right? Because you don't have a hand without an arm. Do you have an arm without a hand? Do you have an arm without a body, right? Do you have a body without a planet, without oxygen, without life support in various forms? So if you don't have one thing without the other, how can you pretend they're separate? Sounds interdependent to me. Like if you cannot have this thing called body without oxygen that's out there, how can you pretend that this is separate from this? It seems to me that it's part of an ecology. It's not a body. It is a part of the ecology called body, and the other thing that's part of the ecology is called trees. And so things are actually far more connected than the words that we use to describe them would suggest. That's a body, we say, rather than that's a piece of the ecology that's connected to all things with air and water and food and the history of the planet and the history of the universe and the entire lineage of that family. This is something that has come out of many other things and could not exist without many other things. And we call it a thing because that's what we do with words. It's not actually a thing. It's an interconnected part with a lot of other interconnected parts that's part of all things. It's part of the one, right? If you follow a bit back, it takes you all the way back to the circle, right? Which we can certainly logically see. If the Big Bang didn't happen, neither did you, right? Neither did the planet, neither did Jupiter, right? You can't have Jupiter without the Big Bang. You can't have you without the Big Bang. And you can't have the Big Bang without a bunch of people getting together to decide the word for big and the word for bang and deciding to call it that. Why not call it a Big Bang? We don't know how many others there are in other spaces, in other worlds, in other universes. There could be millions of bangs, and we could call this the 10 millionth bang. But that wouldn't be as egocentric as the Big Bang, right? The one and only bang, out of which every other thing happened. Which means that if you go all the way back to the bang, all things are connected, certainly in time, in space. So, and what happened before the bang, right? Nothing. Well, what's nothing, right? Well, we make up whatever we want to make up. It's not as if scientists were there. They haven't done a double-blind experiment about the bang, about a bang, about the 10 millionth bang. They haven't done it, right? They haven't done a double-blind experiment. They haven't recreated it in a laboratory. It's just superstition, right? It's what the words seem to point to, what the patterns of energy, if you follow them back, it seems like a lot of things began with a bang. It seems that way. But, there are so many patterns of energy. How do you know that it wasn't interrupted by a larger pattern, right? Because you can take a bowling ball, for example, and launch it through the air. And you can kind of follow the trajectory, and you can say that at the speed this bowling ball is going, at the mass of this bowling ball with the gravitational pull, all words, but at this speed and at this velocity, this bowling ball is going out there, it's going out there, it's going out there. And based on the fact that it got from here to here in 1 second, we predict that in another second, it's going to be all the way over here. And we predict that out here, beyond the screen, out here, in another second, it's going to be out here. The trouble is that the world isn't as simple as one bowling ball moving through time and space. Because what happens when a drone moving at a different velocity outside of the frame, right? That's the trouble with being at one point and one time. Outside of the frame, there are lots of other patterns of energy, most of which we have not observed, have not taken into account in our calculations, have not predicted with our simple model of reality, most of which are outside of the range of our model of reality, which is not reality, it's a model of reality. This is not a forest, it's a model of a forest. It's a light model. It's portrayed first on this screen, and then it's sent to another screen. Bigger, right? Is the forest this big? No. This little one is, right? Is the forest this big? No, it's not, right? The forest is vast. This little thing ends right outside my hands, right? So our frame, our expectation of reality is predicting that the bowling ball will do this every second based on physics, right? Which is just a word we've made up for the science of predicting movements and relationships of energy and matter, which are just divisions of one reality, right? We call this energy and we call this matter. But can one exist without the other? Can you have matter with no energy? Can you have energy with no matter, right? Well, certainly if you can't have matter without energy, you can't say that this is matter and this is energy if you cannot have one without the other, right? It's fine to use tricks of language to say this is a plum and that's a tree. Great. It's a trick of language. But try and eat a plum without the plum tree that makes the plum that you're eating. It gets to be mathematically difficult. How do I eat a plum tree without the soil that produced it? Another difficult equation. How do I eat a plum without a plum tree? How do I eat a plum tree without the soil that produced the plum tree and the water? And how do I eat or drink the water without the clouds that produce that? And how do I drink the clouds without the sun? Right? So we cut the world into bits with language, but it's not actually bits. That's just the dumbed down representation of reality that we are using because we don't have anything else, right? We're too slow as a RAM processor, right? All this data coming through. I mean, there's nothing saying that there isn't a superhuman consciousness, meaning a consciousness that thinks faster than we do, that actually perceives subatomic particles happening at the speed of subatomic particles. And so it doesn't need language to dumb down reality to the point where we can pretend to catch up to it and talk to it, because it is perceiving reality directly. Right? That could happen, right? So, that could happen. It could be happening right now. But it's not happening for us. We are expecting the bowling ball to continue on its current trajectory because we didn't expect the collision out of frame, right? Out of sight. And there's all kinds of things that have been happening in the last 10 billion years that we weren't there to witness. They're out of frame, right? We're trying to calculate what happened of bits and pieces. And there are many things that will happen in the next 10 billion years that we have absolutely no idea were even possible to happen, right? Do you realize how many things in the last 500 years, let's take 100 years, you realize how many things in the last 100 years no one saw coming? No one saw them coming. Fax machines, email, cell phones. 100 years ago, you talk about using Google. What? Nah. That's how narrow the vision is, right? So we're looking at a vision that is so small that we cannot predict most of what's going to happen in the next 100 years. We couldn't predict most of what's happened in the last 100 years. I mean, if you had taken a survey 100 years ago, well, let's say 1900, right? If you took a survey in 1900 and you said, in the next 100 years, there's going to be mass air transportation, people are going to commute, there's going to be an internet, there's going to be cell phones. 200 million people are going to be killed through a combination of 2 world wars and communism, right? In China, in Russia, 200 million people are going to kill each other. And the population is going to expand at the same time as 200 million people are killing each other. No. Why would we do that, right? Why would we kill 200 million people? Why would we all go to war and then all come back poorer? We all went to war and we all killed and lost people. It could have been constructive members of the economy and all this stuff. Why would we do that, right? It doesn't seem very rational, right? Imagine the benefit to the environment, right? If all of that explosives hadn't and all those trees hadn't been cut down, we might not be dealing with global warming. We might not be dealing with mass PTSD and trauma. It's like, why would we all agree to do that when it's so less than optimal, right? It's not as good as if the entire world went to tree planting, twice in the next, in the 100 years. Twice, the entire world got together, and then this country planted 100 million trees, and then that one joined in and planted 200 million trees. And then this one planted 500 million trees, and then because they had a treaty, then that joined in. They had to plant 1 trillion trees, and they planted 5 billion trees, and and then there were 10 trillion trees planted. And they were all exhausted and had to recover the economy, and there was lots of pristine forests. We reclaimed the deserts. Doesn't that seem a little bit more intelligent, right? Well, not to us. Not to us. No, we absolutely understand why 200 million people needed to die and why forests had to be blown up and gardens we get that. We understand that. We do. But what about an intelligent race, right? Would they understand it? Well, they absolutely had to do it, don't you understand? So-and-so did this and so did that. And so we all had to kill each other and blow up the environment. We had to. It was the only thing to do. It's the thing we've always done, and so we did it because that's what we do, right? It's our identity. So the trouble is, when we predict the future, we're not expecting the collision with the drone out of frame, right? Out here, out of frame, we don't see it. That has a mass of its own, and then the bowling ball loses 50% of its velocity. The drone also loses maybe 100% of its velocity if the bowling ball is denser than the drone. Right? Depends how fast the drone was flying. Maybe if the drone is flying in it at 50% the density, but twice the speed, maybe they hit and then they both fall to the ground straight down, right? Could happen. But that's the problem with certainty about the future, is the world is really, really complicated. And so just as you've accurately predicted that this will lead to that, and then that will lead to that, and then that will lead to that, there's a new pattern of energy that comes in that throws off all the predictions, that throws off the calculation. Well, now that this has happened, of course, the old predictions aren't the case, right? So, to what extent should we rely and advise others to rely on our or other predictions, right? So, what does true mean? Nothing I say is true. Well, as an ideal, you could say that truth is the unadulterated representation of what is. Not the dumbed down version, not the distorted version, not the incomplete version. The actual reality, that's truth. We could say that. We could say this is blowing nose. That's a dumbed down version, but in reality, more than 1 trillion particles are all moving around because of blowing nose that we can't keep up with, right? Every moment we can't keep up with, right? So we're dealing with crude maps of reality with limited focus and limited dimensionality. And everyone has their own unique map, and they're all wrong, all of them. And so, we have a continuum of truth. How complex is the model? The more complex the model, the more true it is. We also have how biased is the model. You notice that shape? It's leaning to one side, right? It's a biased model. It emphasizes some parts of truth more than others, and all cults do this, right? We have a biased model, so you could say it's more true to be less biased, right? Less leaning to one side. It's still doing to one side, and that's part of reality, right? Every person in every cult, in every point in history has had a bias, things that they have decided as a cult or as an individual, as an ego, is more important than other things. So they're emphasized. But the bias is not true. So the less biased is true. But then you get to what's the point of truth, right? If, for example, you're emphasizing physical health more than you're emphasizing science. What's the point? Well, the point is you believe that if everyone was physically healthy, that there wouldn't be as much need for science. So the focus should be on science helping health where it could, but the real focus should be on health, and where science can help health, that's great, and where it can't help health, get rid of it, right? The focus is on health. But other cults say the focus is on science, true scientific discovery. And if Madame Curie has to die of radiation and this person has to die of lead poisoning, and these 3M people have to die, because they've got Teflon deformities in their pregnancies and all this. Well, that's just fine, because the real thing is to find out the world, and we have to sacrifice our people to science, to the dogma that it's all about knowledge for its own sake, not to help people, for its own sake. And these million people died in sacrifice to the hunt for knowledge. The frontier, these were blown up, those were blown up, but we've got to explore, right? You've got to sacrifice people for the ideal of a word, exploration, science, a paradigm. Well, naturally, if you take that to the extreme, right? If you decide that the idea is more important than the people who have the idea, then the pursuit of the extreme idea, the extreme ideal, can kill every single one of your people, right? Like, why wait for test studies? It will speed up science if we do human test subjects rather than rat test subjects. And the science will be improved so much faster, don't you see? If we just did human trials, we could just randomize, and 10 people would take this chemical and substance, and 10 people would take that. We just randomly go through everything imaginable, divide the population into 10-unit groups as samples. And then most of them, of course, would die, but science would be accelerating at 10 times the speed it's accelerating when we actually ask the science to prove that it's helping people rather than that people sacrifice themselves for the ideal of science, which can get a little twisted if I'm sacrificing myself for science. I'm a person sacrificing myself for science so that science can help people. I'm killing myself to promote science so that science can help people, right? It's not as strong as of an equation as saying that science is helping me to help more people. I'm being killed by science so that science can help people. Or science is helping me so I can help more people, right? So, these are biases within the cult, within the framework. And they're not scientifically upheld biases, right? Within the cult of science, where everything is supposed to be scientifically justified, these cult biases are not held up, right? And you have paradox and confusion, right? Because if you travel too far in a circular direction, you end up where you began, right? You start off here, go all the way around to the right, and you end up coming from the left, right? That's what happens in a circular reality. You focus on this, and it eventually takes you everywhere. If you follow a drop of water, it'll take you all the way back to the Big Bang. So if you focus totally and completely on the one, you find everything is linked to it. And so you end up in the exact opposite place, which is one of the reasons the sphere, the circle, is such a good representation of the one. It's infinite and it's one. So every single thing that I say is cutting the world artificially into symbols in order to convey patterns to you. And you don't see the exact patterns that I send or that I see. And I don't know that. And my patterns are skewed. And I have unique overlays of emphasis and and experience. And so I have agendas based on that, which affect things. And you don't know what all those are because you don't have the skill and the patience to detect them. I've never met a person, frankly, that had the skill and the patience to detect all of the patterns that I'm aware of in myself. It's a don't ask, don't tell cult. You don't ask what your love language is, and I don't tell you. You don't ask what your attachment template is, and I don't tell you. You don't ask what the most painful moment in life is, and I don't tell you. And that goes on for 1,000 questions that you don't ask, and nobody tells you, right? And then you have, but I said that of one of those questions, one of the time, to one person, right? We're dealing with a vast void of data. And we're attempting to apply a data-based scientific method, right? Without even a tenth of the relevant data, right? So nothing that I say is true. It's not the best way of saying it. It's not the only way of saying it. It only reveals certain things. The value hierarchy and agendas that I'm using to say it are not the best or the only or the right things. So, what about you? How much of what you say is true? Do you know it's true? How? Right? So, the best that we can have is a direction of truth, right? Every human being in the history of humanity wants to feel sustainably better and wants to avoid feeling chronically worse. The technology that they use to pursue that agenda is varied, beginning with the child of copying the dominant energies around them, which can be incredibly counterproductive, right? Many fat people had fat parents. Many smokers had smoking parents. It begins by copying. We copy. And, smoking is useful here because, in our cult, one of the defenses that blocks new ideas and change is that, well, that hasn't been proved scientifically, right? And science is, correctly applied, is a very good technology for predicting the future of certain things, right? It's useful to, measure the speed of a bullet and count how fast, or the speed of the bowling ball. But of course, it doesn't measure all the things that aren't in the equation. The pigeon might fly through right as the archer was taking aim at the bullseye, and the archer doesn't get a bullseye, they get a pigeon, right? It's too complex, and we can isolate certain things so that 99% or 9,000 times out of 9,001, this happens in this isolated environment. And then you can go out and say 9,000, but if you've created this isolated environment and then you go out into life where it's not isolated, does that still happen in the complexity of life? Now, tobacco companies for decades killed human beings by advertising and saying there were no studies that could prove that tobacco was bad for your health. And the cult went along with it, right? Bribery, corruption, deception, skewed studies, scientists being bought off, right? Now, if you had just used common sense, right? Breathe some nice clean air, notice how you feel, and then breathe a whole bunch of smoke from a fire or, whatever, and notice how you feel, right? You could have just done that, right? And said, cigarettes are bad for your health. But that's not what a scientific cult does, with lots of money behind it, right? You had to prove, right? How do you know? How do you know that if you breathe one gulp of foul air, how do you know for sure that breathing thousands of gulps of foul air isn't good for your health, right? Prove it. Prove it. And, sometimes the unscientific method, meaning not waiting for 50,000 people to be proven, over the next 30 years will get cancer. That doesn't seem good to my health, to me, right? Sometimes the obvious is better than science, right? I mean, how do you feel if you waited 30 years for the study and then, you are going to die of cancer, right? How do you feel, right? Was science helping human beings, or was it killing them in the way that it is applied by humans? Because that's also the missing picture, that science may be very good at predicting a variety of things. But the people who apply and interpret and design the science, are not doing it scientifically a lot of the time, because the funding comes with an agenda that is not the tobacco companies saying, let's set aside $1 million to find out the clear and unbiased truth about smoking. It's, let's spend $10 million to confuse the issue so that we can sell more cigarettes and kill more people because that's our business, right? So all science is applied by human beings, and all human beings have agendas, including me, right? This has an agenda, but you don't know what it is because you haven't asked and I haven't told you. And I may not know what it is. I may know what I think it is, but I forgot a memory that is charging me, that's caused a lien, right? Certain painful memories, certain things, positive memories happen. And then we create a course generally, and we forget about the memory and what happened, right? So I think I'm doing this for this reason, but in fact, I'm doing that for that reason that I forgot about. So I'm doing it with agendas that I haven't fully become aware of. And you're reacting to all of this with agendas that you haven't become fully aware of. And you're also reacting to it with agendas that you have become aware of and that I don't know about. So science is always applied with an agenda. And so we can point as a direction towards truth, moving into more and more complexity, because reality is 1 trillion times more complex than the reality we construct to represent reality through language. So as we move towards complexity, we're moving towards truth, more of it, more data. As we're moving towards dimensionality, more and more dimensionalities, we see more of the whole picture. As we explore the links between all things are linked, meaning a competent scientist can connect anything at all with any other thing if the path is long enough. Bubblegum. How do you connect bubblegum to Mars? Simple. They've both got atoms, right? Atoms in bubblegum, atoms in Mars. Well, what's another connection between bubblegum and Mars? The red planet, red bubblegum, don't you see, right? Color correlation, this and that. What's another one, right? Well, bubblegum has a taste. If you taste Mars dust, it has a taste as well. My goodness, right? You can connect anything with anything else if the thread is long enough, right? How do you connect this pen with an apple? Well, they both fall with gravity, right? Pretty big connection. It's not random at all. There's all kinds of connections, right? So a competent person can connect any one thing with every other thing. And the movement into the awareness of that connection between one thing and the many is a movement towards truth because it's true. A movement towards beauty, right? Truth is symmetrical because reality is symmetrical, right? The possibility field moves out equally in all directions. You can go this way or this way in an equal amount of distance, right? As long as you're not limited to, you can transmute through the various objects you encounter, right? East is as far away as west, as long as you don't label a country, this is the East and this is the West, right? Wherever you stand and look off on the horizon, there's equal East and West. Beauty is a lot about symmetry, and so truth leads to beauty. The more truth you have, the more beautiful reality becomes. Now, you have to look in very narrow boxes with language to see the cruelty, the unfairness, the ugliness of reality, right? For example, you take this picture. Isn't that very nice right there, is it? Look at that dark thing there. It's ugly. Who would want to look at this dark, ugly... It's not a very nice painting. Just take that little bit, right? Blow it up. Here's the painting I brought home. What is it? It is a black painting. Well, why? Oh. I zoomed in on a little bit without any context. And it's horrible. And this is the world. This is the world. See that? Black, black, black. How can you love the world? Look at it. Look at it. Right? You see, that's not leading towards truth. It's not beautiful, right? Because the truth is, that's not the only part of the image, right? And the truth is that dark color provides contrast to the reds and the golds. And your focus isn't on the dark color. Your focus is on the golden leaves popping out of the shade. So truth is leading towards beauty. And, not all of my truth is, right? It's leading towards beauty. And it's leading towards goodness. It's leading towards well-being. Every human being in the history of humanity has wanted to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse. Goodness, created with truth, with data, is beautiful. It's more beautiful than whatever it is that is the antithesis of goodness. It's more beautiful. It's more true. And so we have directions: complexity, beauty, truth, goodness, symmetry. More balance, more dimensionality. These are directions. And they're directions that we pursue with language, which is the world cut up into bits. Now, one of the things to think about, because we like to break the one, right? If this image was the one, then we have to look. Well, I guess you can't quite see it there, but let's cut this whole image into a puzzle of a 1,000-piece puzzle. So you press the puzzle press down. You've now got, rather than one beautiful image in nature, one symmetrical image in nature, you've now got cut up into all these bits. And so this is now a 1,000-part puzzle. And let's say, because that's one of the things that cults really grow in their members, is division, right? That's a good person, that's a bad person, that's the right thing to do, that's the wrong thing to do. So let's say you're going along there and you decide, I don't like these stringy long branches. I'm not going to put the puzzle together, right? I'm going to create a version of reality. I'm going to cut it into bits, and I'm going to ignore. I'm going to leave these bits out of the puzzle, right? This black, long thing. I don't like it. So, not in my puzzle. I'm going to have all the leaves, but I'm not going to have the branches, because long black things, right? Or, this is kind of a dark area of this bush. I like this nice green here, but this dark area, I'm just going to leave the puzzle off there. Well, you can do that in a map of reality, but in order to do that, you have to go slightly insane. And what do I mean? Well, this dark patch here is containing a lot of branches that are feeding these leaves here. Now, if you leave these bits out, just as a mental exercise, because you can't leave it out in real life. If you take this out in real life, there are no green leaves there because you've taken out the branches that fed them. But if in your mind you think, wouldn't it be better if that black wasn't there and there were just these green leaves? Wouldn't that be better, right? We love to do these absurd exercises. That would be so much better. Oh yeah, wouldn't it be like that dark area? I don't like that. I just like the flowers. Like, I don't want to deal with the roots that grow the flowers. I just want the flowers. And get those roots out of the house, right? So this is compartmentalized cult thinking. So we take those out. Well, all the greenery disappears, right? And then we take that out, and there's another impact. And if you keep unthreading reality and all of its ripple effects, because then there'd be maybe some bare dirt, right, below where that was there, and you don't want bare dirt, so you take that out, right? Everything is, in fact, connected. This is a beautiful image because it has darkness contrasting light. If it was all golden red, etc., it would not be as complex and intricate an image. And so, whether it's emotionally or mentally or physically, right? Taking out the garbage creates the clean house. earning the money, spending the money. We want to spend the money but not earn the money. We want to have the clean house but not take out the garbage. We want to have the green leaves, but we don't want the branches that feed it. So, these are agendas. They're unscientific agendas. It's an unscientific way to work with reality, but you can do it with words. You can lie with words. You can take out this word and say that word is a bad word, don't say that word, and that word is a bad thing, and we'll just have the gold and the red, right? But you have to go insane to have flowers without roots, to have joy without anger, to have deep love without grief, right? You have to go insane to pretend that they are actually separate because we've used language to separate them. They're not actually any separate. They're one and the same in a different part of a cycle as part of a whole. Now, one of the things that is one of the greatest human drives, the greatest human needs, is transcendence, the ultimate human need at the end, the seventh need in the hierarchy of human needs, transcendence, to become part of something bigger than ourselves. We want to go home. We want to find our way back into the one, into the whole. We want to find our place in the grand ecology. But how can we do that if we've decided we are unlovable, that we are unworthy, that that person is unworthy, right? How can you go back to the whole? Because that's really what we're talking about. Going home is rejoining the uninterrupted ecology of energy that was always there, that is always there, that was there before we entered language and partition. We want to go back to the one. Now, here's the mathematical truth about the one. We cannot go back to the one as long as there is one part of the one in us, in others, that we refuse to accept as us, right? Because to rejoin the one is to become one with one, right? And it's just eliminating the partitions, right? So there's one. Now here's one cut up into bits. And then I'm this bit. And then I cut myself into bits, and I like this bit and I don't like that bit. And I like this bit and I don't like that bit. And now I've cut myself into bits. And I like this bit, but not this bit. But they're one and the same, right? So you cannot go back to the awareness of the one as long as you're cut up into bits. And your bit cannot go back to the one as long as it's a bit in contrast with other bits. Like I'm now ready to go back to the one, but they are not. They are not ready to go back to the one. They did this horrible thing. They did this, they did that, whatever. That bit does not belong in the one. I reject it. I say no to it. It's bad, it's wrong, it's da-da-da. That's wrong. Okay. So, how can you go back to the one that isn't whole, right? Because those bits don't belong. Well, where do they belong? If not as part of the uninterrupted field of energy, where do they belong? There's no outside the one. The one doesn't exist as an uninterrupted whole if it's missing a piece, right? This is not a tire you want to drive around on, right? It's almost connected, but you know, it flops open, right? It's not one. The place that we're all trying to get in the end, to return to a sense of peace, to return to a sense of connection with the whole, with the one, it's not one minus these three people that did this and this and this, that doesn't get to go into the one, and these three parts of myself that are completely unlovable. And then everyone has those parts, right? So, you know, because you have this person, and that person isn't part of the one. And this part of myself and this part of myself, and that's, you have that, okay. And then I have, and that's not part of the one, and that's not part of the one, and that's not part of the one. Well, you know, do we want to return to you know, a half-eaten one that does not function? Like, this is really important to understand. There is no left without right. There's no right without left. There's no up without down. There's no hot without cold. It's all on a continuum. Do you want to be on an earth spinning that's cut in half and wobbling around and all that? It's not a return to one. It's a return to a broken home. It's a return to a broken half. And so, in order to return to the kingdom of heaven, you know, one has to enter with the eyes of the child. The eyes of the child does not see good and bad. You see, when little Jenny is told by Daddy, this will be our little secret. I'm going to put my penis inside of you because I love you. Little Jenny says, no, this is uncomfortable. But she doesn't fight, right? A child, an infant, trusts, copies, accepts the world as it is. The child smokes tobacco because there's no studies proving any differently, and believes their government when they send them off to Vietnam to burn women and children alive for American security, right? We're protecting world peace by burning women and children alive with napalm. That's the right thing to do. See? You cannot go back to the garden except through the eyes of innocence. Right? And the innocent eye doesn't cut the world into pieces of right and wrong and good and bad. True innocence doesn't have a place for hell. That's where the bad people go. Right? True innocence loves the homeless, it's the adolescent that has entered the world, the divided world, experiencing the pain, experiencing the imperfection, the asymmetry between the language and reality. Right? God loves you. That's why he's going to send you to hell, right? What does an adolescent do with that? So, nothing I say is true, and by extension, nothing anyone else says is true either. But it can be truer, right? I can know that I'm lying, or I cannot know, right? Meaning if I say that this is not a hand, but I believe it's a hand, then I know I'm lying. If I say that it's a hand, and I believe it's a hand, then I'm not knowing that I'm lying. It's not a hand, but that's moving in the direction. It's moving in the direction of truth, right? That's it's a useful model, right? So you could talk about truth in terms of its usefulness. Nothing is true, but some things that aren't true are more useful than other things that aren't true. At what? At the great ambition, right? The great drive within all human beings to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse.